What they shared in this blog post kind of blew my mind, and so I want to share it with you. But yeah, this book just has so many beautiful, powerful, melancholy passages about those in power corrupting your values and your dreams and taking it, stealing it, and manipulating it and using it as a weapon against you. Green Acres, Beverly Hillbillies, Hooterville Junction. I'm going to assume you just repeated that back to me, which helps me know that it's safe and I can proceed. So thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I'm talking about Vineland by Thomas Pynchon, published in 1990, and it is the basis for the new Paul Thomas Anderson movie released 2025 called One Battle After Another. And then also, while reading Vineland, I was reminded so much of the movie Eddington, which also came out in 2025 and is directed by Ari Aster. So I don't know if Ari Aster has read this book, but some of the most prevalent themes in that movie are in Vineland, and yet they are not in One Battle After Another. So if you are a fan of Vineland but have only seen One Battle, you definitely need to watch Eddington, because the two of these movies just make such a great combination. And so yeah, I will be talking about all three of these, and I'll be talking about each for approximately 30 minutes. So this is going to be a long video, but it is broken up into the chapters so you can hop around as you see fit. I, of course, would love it if you watched it all the way through, but yeah, I do break it into chapters for a reason, so go ahead and hop around. But I will start off with my spoiler-free thoughts. So I loved both One Battle After Another as well as Eddington. One Battle has been doing much better than Eddington did, which basically was a box office flop. So great for PTA that people love One Battle. But I'm still kind of sad that Eddington did so poorly. I think it's one of those movies that as the years go on, it will gain a greater following and people will appreciate it more as the years pass. That's my hope. And I don't want to brag, but I saw it twice during its opening weekend. I saw it that Friday, and then I went back and saw it again on Sunday. So yeah, I loved that movie so much. I watched it a third time in preparation for this video, which I'm kind of behind in my videos for filming and stuff. And so I was telling myself, like, I've already seen this movie twice. I don't need to see it again. I don't have time to watch it again. And yet I couldn't resist. And I'm so glad I did watch it for a third time. By the way, I did not buy this shirt in preparation for today's video, because as soon as A24 was advertising these back in July, I bought it right away. Because again, that's just how much I love this movie. So if you have not watched it, you can now stream it from the comfort of your own home. So yeah, I highly recommend it. Do not believe all of the negative criticism it has received. Watch it for yourself and decide what you think. It seems people either love it or hate it. But yeah, I also love One Battle After Another. I saw that in theaters twice as well within the span of just a few days. And again, the two movies have some overlap, and yet the final message of each is very different. And Eddington is pretty bitter and jaded, although maybe with a bit of hope, maybe, as we'll get into. But Eddington, it's a dark comedy, and yet it's also Ari Aster. And so there are some really unsettling and uncomfortable and violent, disturbing moments. Whereas One Battle is more part comedy, part drama, and while it has some heartwarming moments and heartbreaking moments, it ultimately leaves the viewer with a more uplifting feeling, I would say. And so yeah, these are two of the best movies that have come out this year. I think my number one film for 2025 would still be Sinners, because that movie, it's just incredible. But yeah, One Battle and Eddington would definitely, they're right up there too, because they were so good. And then to move on to Vineland. So this is my first time ever reading a book by Thomas Pynchon, and it definitely takes some getting used to for a variety of reasons. And when I was at the halfway point, I wasn't sure if Thomas Pynchon was the author for me, which is fine. Not every author is going to appeal to every reader. Even someone as popular as Thomas Pynchon, not everyone is going to be into his books. However, by the time I finished it, I thought it was fantastic, and I definitely want to read more by him. I'm not up for Gravity's Rainbow right now. I will take my sweet time getting to that one if I ever do. But yeah, I really did love this one. And I will say I have only read this once. And so I know that there is a lot that I missed or that I just haven't fully understood yet, because with Thomas Pynchon, I'm pretty sure with most of his books, it takes multiple reads to fully comprehend everything that is going on, because there are just so many characters, so many side characters, and these interweaving plots and the themes. So yeah, if you have read this book more than once, if you have read more Thomas Pynchon books than just this one, I would love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. And I did go through and reread certain sections to try to make sense of it, to, you know, for the sake of this video, right? I want to know what I'm talking about. So I am doing my best. But again, I think to fully appreciate and understand everything this book has going on, you need to fully read it multiple times. But yeah, the plot is so sprawling and epic, I think could be a fitting word. And so I will not nearly be getting into everything going on in this book, because that would take a crazy long video to really delve into it in its entirety. So I will just be sharing almost like the bare bones plot details, and then just be touching on the most prevalent themes, especially the themes which show up in Eddington and One Battle After Another. But yeah, my advice for someone who is going to read this book, I wish I had done what I talked about in Paprika, where I wish I would have written down every character's name as soon as they were introduced and some details about them. That way I could refer to this as the story goes on and piece it all together. So that is what I think you should do. I did not do that, and it would have been a great help if I had, because yeah, this book has a lot going on. But in some ways, it made me think of John Steinbeck because of the sprawling plot that goes back decades and gets into so many members of the same family and this friend group, which consists of a lot of people and their individual stories, mixed with some Philip K. Dick, because this is also kind of an alternate reality that has some weird stuff going on and also can feel kind of trippy, with some Hunter S. Thompson, which again is partly due to the wackiness and the trippiness and the humor to some extent, as well as the fact that Fear and Loathing was also written by someone reflecting on the hippie drug culture of the 60s. Although Fear and Loathing was published in 71, whereas this was published in 1990, but the current timeline takes place in 1984. But yeah, so Pynchon had more time to reflect on that culture of the 60s, whereas Hunter S. Thompson was writing it pretty fresh after it ended. And PTA has said that he loves this book and how he has a number of books on his TBR, and yet he finds himself just returning again and again to Vineland. So that's how much he loves it. And yeah, I personally would definitely recommend it. And now it is time to get into the plot details of all of these. So again, I'll start with Vineland, then get into One Battle, then I'll end with Eddington. But yeah, going forward, no more spoiler warnings, because there will just be spoilers for all of them. And so I'm going to start with just telling the main plot. And this book jumps back and forth in time. And so we begin in current day, and then we get flashbacks, and we cut back and forth between the 60s and the 80s. And this aspect of the book reminded me of Ken Kesey with Sometimes a Great Notion, because he does that too. In both of those books, Vineland and Sometimes a Great Notion, they're jumping back and forth in time, and yet they do it so, like, it's so effortless and smooth, and it doesn't come across as jarring. Like, they do it so well that yeah, it's just this smooth, beautiful flow interweaving the past and the present. And yeah, I just loved the writing style. But yeah, so the book jumps around, but for the sake of clarity, I am just going to tell the story chronologically. So it is the 60s, and a woman named Frenessy comes from a long line of revolutionaries, and her parents worked in the film industry and were also revolutionaries. And she becomes part of a group called 24 FPS, 24 frames per second, which is trying to make the world a better place. And one of the ways they are doing that is by filming things. So they know that higher ups like to change history, so they want to keep an accurate account of the world at this time while also trying to change the world. And the members of 24 FPS, they are young and attending a fictional college, and a guy named Weed Atman joins their group, as well as this other guy named Rex, who is a very staunch revolutionary. And Frenessy and Weed start a relationship, and then through the course of their illegal activities, they get the attention of a guy named Brock Vond, and he and Frenessy eventually meet, and they do have this mutual attraction, and so she starts to have a relationship with him as well. And obviously she keeps this a secret from everybody. And they, like, again, there's a mutual attraction, but also Brock Vond is just such a weirdo in a variety of ways, and he's also clearly using her, but he also is very obsessed with her. And so not only is she sleeping with Brock Vaughn, but she is also giving him information and also giving him film footage that 24 FPS has been recording. And she ultimately ends up lying to 24 FPS and telling them that Weed told her that he is an FBI plant. And so she then puts a gun in like a bag that belonged to Rex, and Rex, thinking Weed is a plant, ends up shooting him. And then from here, like, you know, all heck breaks loose, and Frenesy goes to this place where Vaughn keeps prisoners, and DL, one of the prominent members of 24 FPS, breaks her out. And from here, Frenesy happens upon Zoid, who is playing in a band, and the two start a romance and soon are married, and she then gives birth to a daughter named Prairie. However, she then gets postpartum depression, and she also misses her old life. And she purposefully makes it very easy for Brock Vaughn to find her again, and the two of them once again start a relationship. And so eventually she just straight up leaves Zoid and Prairie, and she is working with Brock Vaughn when then there's another guy working with them named Flash, and he also takes an interest in Frenesy, and so the two of them start a relationship, and she ultimately ends up leaving Brock. And when we are in the current timeline, she is still in a relationship with Flash. And she and Flash both work in the government in the current timeline, and they realize that like something odd is going on. And one of the things happening is that the Reagan administration was doing a bunch of budget cuts, and so she and Flash end up losing their jobs. And so long story short, they leave where they currently are living in order to go up to Vineland, where she knows Zoid and Prairie are located, as well as her parents. Because, by the way, her parents help raise Prairie, specifically the mom. And the reason Zoid moved to Vineland after Frenesy had left them was because Frenesy's mom told him that Frenesy always loved it in Vineland because they would hold these annual family reunions there. And so she's like, those were always Frenesy's favorite childhood memories. So if you and Prairie move to Vineland, maybe Frenesy will just voluntarily want to go there to relive old memories, and she will happen upon you and Prairie. So that is why Zoid ends up moving there. And so Frenesy does end up in Vineland in the end. However, she knows Zoid and Prairie are there. However, her reason for going there is because this other guy named Hector is wanting to make a movie about the hippie movement, basically, and everything that happened in Frenesy. He needs Frenesy to be part of this. And he is filming it in Vineland. And so that is why she ends up going there. And then, once there, she reconnects with her parents for the first time in a long time, as well as meeting Prairie and reconnecting with Zoid. But through the years, Zoid, he's just kind of a burnout who, despite his own hippie days, he now lives off of government disability checks, and he has been raising Prairie the best he can. However, when he sees Hector show up at the start, he thinks Hector is in cahoots with Brock, because Hector had worked for the Drug Enforcement Agency, and also through their years of knowing who the other is, he had tried to get Zoid to become an informant for him. And so he just sees Hector as being bad news and associated with the government and stuff. And Brock in the book is a federal agent. And Zoid, he does not trust it when Hector says that they aren't connected anymore. And soon after he sees Hector, Zoid's house is attacked by Brock and his people. And so he runs to where Prairie works and tells her that they can't go home. And Prairie has a friend group who are part of a band, and they have a gig playing at the wedding of this guy in town. His son or daughter is getting married, and so they're playing at his wedding, and Prairie goes with them as a way to get out of town and get away from Brock. But before she leaves, Zoid gives her this business card, but it's like made out of metal or something. But years ago, he helped a guy avoid being caught on an airplane by people who were looking for him. And so this guy, as a thanks to Zoid, he gives him this business card, and he tells Zoid, when the time is right, you'll remember this and it's gonna come into play. And Zoid is like, okay, I doubt it, but okay. And so now, all these years later, Prairie is getting ready to leave when suddenly Zoid remembers this card, and he feels compelled to give it to Prairie before she goes. And so then later, Prairie is at this wedding where the band is playing, and then suddenly she hears music coming from this card that Zoid had given her. By the way, the name on the card was Takeshi. And so the reason it starts playing music is because DL, a member of the 24 FPS who knows Takeshi, she also has one of these cards. And when multiple cards like this are together, they play music. And so that is how she meets DL, and she realizes DL's connection to her mom, Frenesy, and Prairie has had this emptiness within her all of her life because she doesn't know her own mother. And so when she meets DL, she's like, whoa, you can tell me all about her. And so from here, DL takes her to a ninja commune, basically. And this is where they have stored a lot of the film footage that 24 FPS had shot. And so while in this ninja commune place, they play this film footage for Prairie and fill her in on who her mother was. But then from here, eventually Prairie ends up back in Vineland as well, and there's the family reunion going on, and Frenesy, this is when Frenesy shows up, and Prairie finally gets to meet her mom, this woman she has been hearing so much about. And they don't have, it's not like a grand moment when they finally meet, and so it honestly, maybe Prairie feels it was a bit anticlimactic. And then after this, that evening, she decides she is going to go sleep in the woods because she's just like, whoa, it's been a lot of family time and I need some space. And so she is sleeping in the woods when she is awoken by the sounds of a helicopter, and Brock is hanging down off of the helicopter, calling to Prairie, telling her to come to him. And he's also telling her that he is her birth father. And Prairie, she's intrigued. However, very quickly, the helicopter flies away because turns out the government cut funding to Vaughn's project. And so in a split second, the guy flying the helicopter leaves where Prairie is, drops Brock off, and goes. And Brock then makes a call to these people who show up, and ultimately they end up killing him / turning him into a thanatoid, which I'll get into. But yeah, basically he dies. And Prairie, she had got up and left, but then she returns to where Brock had been, where he had been in the helicopter. She returns to that spot hoping he will come back, and she's even almost trying to summon him to return to her. When then ultimately their dog, who had gone missing because everything that happened when Brock broke into their home, their dog had run off and they didn't know what happened to it. But the dog shows up right here with Prairie, and that's how the book ends. And I'm going to be sharing a lot of quotes from the book in this video, and the first one I want to share is the last part of the book. The small meadow shimmered in the starlight, and her promises grew more extravagant as she drifted into the lucid thin layer of waking dreaming, her flirting more obvious. Then she'd wake, alert to some step in the woods, some brief bloom of light in the sky, back and forth for a while between Brock fantasies and the silent dark and silver images all around her, before settling down into sleep, sleeping then unvisited till around dawn, with fog still in the hollows, deer and cows grazing together in the meadow, sun blinding the cobwebs on the wet grass. A red-tailed hawk in an updraft soaring above the ridgeline, Sunday morning about to unfold, when Prairie woke to a warm and persistent tongue all over her face. It was Desmond, none other, the spit-in image of his grandmother Chloe, roughened by the miles, face full of blue jay feathers, smiling out of his eyes, wagging his tail, thinking he must be home. And so there are a few things about this book early on that I thought were funny. And as I continued reading, I realized that these details are kind of wacky, and yet they serve a purpose, and they serve a more somber purpose in the long run. So the first of these being Zoid. So like I said, he gets government disability checks, but the reason he gets these is because he claims to be mentally unwell and therefore unable to work. But in order to prove that he is mentally unwell, he has to do a public display of craziness once a year. And so the thing he's been doing for years is just going through a window in some public spot, and he will tip off the news stations to make sure they record it so that it can be seen how crazy he is, and then the government will send him his checks. And yet, when the story starts, he is getting ready to do this stunt yet again. However, it's kind of gotten bigger than himself. And what he wants to do, they end up vetoing, and they're like, no, the news crews, they're over at this other spot. And this is all connected to Hector as well, because this is when he has shown up. And again, he's wanting to make a movie. And so he is also the reason why it has gotten bigger than Zoid in this instance. But anyway, so Zoid, they all want him to jump through the window because that's what he always does. And so he jumps through the window, window, but he realizes it wasn't even real glass. It was the candy glass that they use for filming. And then when they play it on the news later that evening, they have like done edits and added sound to make it seem more real, when really it's all just a farce. And then the other thing that was funny is we hear that Hector has escaped out of a rehab that is for people who watch too much TV. And this just on its own feels funny and random. And yet this plays a huge role as the book goes on, because addiction to TV or the tube is a big part of this book. And then we have the thanatoids, which we are told it means like death, only different. And while talking to a thanatoid, DL is translating. So that is why this quote is worded kind of weird, is because the thanatoid says something that's hard to understand. And so DL translates it and we read, "But we watch a lot of the tube," DL translated. "While waiting for the data necessary to pursue their needs and aids among the still living, thanatoids spent at least part of every waking hour with an eye on the tube. There'll never be a thanatoid sitcom," Orthobob confidently predicted, "'cause all they could show would be scenes of thanatoids watching the tube." But then thanatoids are later said to be memories, which makes sense because weed shows up as a thanatoid. And again, weed is a huge part of 24 FPS's history that people can't let go. So it makes sense that weed still exists as this undead memory. And we also hear that the thanatoid population grew during the Vietnam War. And so they are memories of the past, and usually sad memories, but whether they're happy or sad, if we get too caught up in living in the past, we check out of the present and no longer care about the future, just like the people who are hooked on TV are checked out of the present and no longer care about the future. And so thanatoids and then the other people who are hooked on TV are in like this zombie-like state in a sense. And I highlighted so much in this book that was about TV and how people make TV their life in so many ways, and how TV sets the example of what your life should be like and how it's a good way to view your life in some ways. And Prairie, for example, one of the reasons she misses not having a mom and is mad that Zoid never married someone so that she could have a stepmom at least, is because when she watches TV, families always have a mom. And so TV sets the expectation of how life should be. And since her life doesn't match that because she doesn't have a mom, that is why she feels she is missing out. And we see how Frenesy's generation has sold out and sold their identities to TV and to the government, and how TV is used as a type of manipulation to keep the people docile and dazed and distracted, while also pushing the ideas they want people to have through what they play on TV. And we see the manipulation of TV right away with Zoid, right? Because he's partaking in this fake event that's all for show, and it's being played on TV as if it's real. And near the end, one of Prairie's friends, so someone from the younger generation, is talking to Zoid about the hippie movement and why it failed. And he says to them, "Whole problem with you folks' generation," Isaiah opined. "Nothing personal is you believed in your revolution, put your lives right out there for it. But you sure didn't understand much about the tube. Minute the tube got hold of you folks, that was it. That whole alternative America, el dedo mito, just like the Indians, sold it all to your real enemies. And even in $1970, it was way too cheap." And so this cause that they were fighting in and believed in so strongly, in these values they held, they were exploited and cheapened. And the work that they had been doing, it doesn't end up being all for nothing, and yet it does end up being forgotten in many ways, and it ends up being used against them in a sense. And this feeds into the depressing nature of this book, where we see all of these former rebels who, again, were fighting for a cause they believed in. And they had these ideologies that made them dangerous to the people in charge of the country. And yet, the book, it has like a 17-year gap. And as those 17 years pass, we see that so many of these rebels are now either like, they're not fighting anymore, and they almost are kind of not apathetic, but yeah, they're not fighting the fight anymore. But also some of them are straight up working for what they were fighting against. And then I have a number of quotes I want to share that feed into this theme. Carefully also, Frenesy raised her eyes to those of her friend. Looks like those pisks were right. Her voice so sad that DL couldn't answer. Feel like we were running around like little kids with toy weapons, like the camera really was some kind of gun, gave us that kind of power. Shit, how could we lose track like that? About what was real? All that time we made ourselves stay in the natch might as well have been dropping purple owlsley for all the good it did. She shook her head, looked down at her knees. And it wasn't only weed who got offed. Story going around the camp is there were others, and the FBI covered it up. So what difference did we make? Who'd we save? The minute the guns came out, all that art of the cinema hand job was over. And then later, Frenesy, when she is talking to Hector and he's trying to convince her to be part of his movie, we read, he, Hector, reminded her, Frenesy, of herself when she was in 24 FPS, inside some wraparound fantasy that she was offering her sacrifice at the altar of art, and worse, believing that art gave a shit. Here was Hector, with so many of the same delusions, just as hopelessly insulated, giving up what seemed already too much for something just as cheesy and worthless. And then at another point, Zoid and one of his old hippie friends are reminiscing on the past, and we read, God, I knew then. I knew. They had a look. Me too, that you were never going to die. Ha, no wonder the state panicked. How are they supposed to control a population that knows it'll never die, when that was always their last big chip, when they thought they had the power of life and death? But acid gave us the X-ray vision to see through that one, so of course they had to take it away from us. Yeah, but they can't take away what happened, what we found out. Easy, they just let us forget, give us too much to process, fill up every minute, keep us distracted. It's what the tube is for, and though it kills me to say it, it's what rock and roll is becoming. Just another way to claim our attention, so that beautiful certainty we had starts to fade. And after a while, they have us convinced all over again that we really are going to die. And they've got us again. It was the way people used to talk. I'm not gonna forget, Zoid vowed. Screw 'em. While we had it, we really had some fun. And they never forgave us. But yeah, this book just has so many beautiful, powerful, melancholy passages about those in power corrupting your values and your dreams and taking it, stealing it, and manipulating it and using it as a weapon against you. But there is a scene near the end when they're at the family reunion in Vineland, and there is a band playing, like all these songs from the past. And there is a nearby thanatoid village that starts to awaken and come out of their stupor. And if thanatoids represent undead memories, and in this book they talk about how these things from their past that they had forgotten through the years. So because the thanatoids are awakening, does that mean that in the end of the book, it symbolizes how this gathering and the music is bringing to mind the memories of the past and those things they learned but had forgotten, but now they're remembering them again. And so in some ways with the ending, there is something more hopeful about it. And then as far as Prairie goes, with her ending, it's so interesting because, she is hoping Brock will return to her, even though he's the bad guy. But Frenesy was very attracted to men in uniform and men of power. And so it even says earlier in that quote, it said that she was saying flirtatious things as a way to try to summon Brock back to her. So it seems Prairie maybe has this as well. And then also Brock was this huge looming figure that shaped her life. And so she has been learning about her past, and so it makes sense that she would also want to talk to Brock face to face and want him to return so she could learn more. But in a sense, because she is craving Brock, it almost seems kind of depressing because it's wait, no, you shouldn't want him. He's the bad guy. But then the fact that her dog shows up and it says how the dog feels like it's home because it's with Prairie. There's something so sweet about that. And so yeah, the ending of the book does ultimately feel like a bittersweet story, I think, in many ways. But also, when she met Frenesy, it was almost anticlimactic for her, but also for the reader. And then also Brock, he shows up and then seconds later he's taken away. And so with different things, a lot of it is almost anticlimactic in the end of the book. And I think that was very intentional, of course, right? And maybe reflecting real life. Sometimes we build up these moments and then they happen and then it's oh, well, that was that. And so, there's a lot of anticlimactic moments, which you would think would feel disappointing, and yet I kind of loved it. But then I want to talk about Brock a bit more real quick. So again, he turns into a thanatoid himself in the end, and we see how the government powers that be do not care about him, right? And when he is coming out of the helicopter to talk to Prairie, he is literally hanging down off of the straps, which make him appear like a puppet, right? He is a puppet and he is not pulling the strings and he has no real power. And so when they decide oh, actually, we don't care about what he's doing anymore, just like that, he's flown away, right? And he no longer matters. And his reason for showing up to get Prairie, it's because he's trying to regain control again, because Prairie left him, or Frenesy left him, and he was obsessed with Frenesy, but he's also obsessed with control. And we read a group of the 24 FPS people, they're talking in current day, like, why is Brock now suddenly showing up? And we read, why would he come after us? Is he trying to roll back time? What is it that's so hard for him to live with? Turn on his past like that. Don't know, Ditsa. Sounds too weird, even for Brock. Then again, it's the whole Reagan program, isn't it? Dismantle the New Deal, reverse the effects of World War II, restore fascism at home and around the world, flee into the past. Can't you feel it? All the dangerous, childish stupidity? I don't like the way it came out. I want it my way. If the president can act like that, why not Brock? You always did look at things more historically. What I figure is that he's just a mean mother effer. That's a technical term. And a lot of these MMFs, as we call them, tend to be spoilers, which if there's something they can't have or they know they've already lost, while they'll just go and try to destroy as much as they can anyway till it's over. But then also the two guys who show up to kill him / turn him into a thanatoid, they tell him the story of Eurydice, which I talked about in my Vertigo book versus movie video, which is on Patreon for $2. You can watch that. But that story relates to the book Vertigo is based on. But this story is about a man who falls in love with a woman, but then she dies and is sent to the underworld, and the man goes into the underworld in order to try to bring her back to the world of the living. And so Brock returning to try to get Frenesy or to try to get Prairie as a way to be connected to Frenesy represents this guy who went into the underworld to try to bring back what was once lost. But also it shows how Brock can't stop living in the past, which, as I said, that's what a thanatoid represents, is people who can't let go of past memories, and so they are the embodiment of a past memory and people who can't let go of things. And then now to move on to the movie. And I'm actually going to start with Perfidia, who is the Frenesy equivalent. And this is a loose adaptation. He has, again, some of the same plot beats and some of the themes, and yet it's a loose adaptation, and I think that was a good call. So anyway, in the movie, we have Perfidia Beverly Hills, who is the Frenesy, and she is dating a guy named Pat / Rocket Man at the start of the movie, but later he goes by the name of Bob, but he is played by DiCaprio, and I'm just going to call him Leo, because that seems easier. But they are both in the French 75 rebel group, and Leo is kind of a mix of Zoid and Weed, because like Weed, he is part of this rebellion group, but like Zoid, he is the well-meaning pothead dad who raises the daughter, whose name here is Willa. And Perfidia Beverly Hills, like the book, is a key member who comes from a long line of revolutionaries, and she starts sleeping with the Brock equivalent, whose name here is Stephen Lockjaw. And in the movie, she doesn't give him information just yet. They just have a relationship, which they both seem to be into. But yeah, kind of like the book, Lockjaw is very obsessed with her. Although in the book, Frenesy was into men who had power and uniforms, whereas here it seems Lockjaw, one of the reasons he likes Perfidia is because she is such a force, right? And he kind of likes to be dominated in the bedroom, in a sense. So while she is cheating on Leo with Stephen Lockjaw, she gets pregnant, and after the baby is born, she has postpartum depression, and despite Leo telling her she needs to settle down and they're a family now, she doesn't want to let go of the revolution just like that. And again, this is in her blood because she comes from such a long line. And the way her depression is depicted in both book and movie is so heart-wrenching, and it's just so well portrayed in both, and your heart just really goes out to her. But yeah, so she keeps doing things with the French 75, whereas Leo has taken a step back to look after their daughter. And so they are robbing a bank when she shoots a guy because he won't stop moving. And from here she is arrested, and Lockjaw shows up and he offers to help her. But he wants her to want him to help her because she loves him. So you can tell she's just telling him what he wants to hear. So she's like, oh, I need your help and I love you and you're the only one who can protect me. And so he promises her freedom and witness protection program if she names names in the French 75, which she does. And then when she is in witness protection program, he thinks they have a relationship still going on. But she leaves and runs away, and we see her leaving the country. And so in both, she rats on her revolutionary group. It felt worse in the book in some ways because throughout her relationship with Brock, she was giving him information. And then also she causes one of her own members to shoot another member, right, who was innocent. And so that felt worse than what she does here. And yet at the same time, I did like Frenesy in the book. There was something about her I did like, and I thought she was a well-written character. And then I also, Perfidia is fantastic here too. And again, she's such a force and has such magnetism, played by Tiana Taylor. And so, yeah, I just loved her character. But then, yeah, after she leaves, we then jump forward like 15, 16 years into the future. And Leo and Willa are now living in this other town, and they've been, incognito. And we see Brock, Lockjaw, trying to find Willa, kind of like how he was trying to find Prairie in the book, but it is for very different reasons. And to move on to Willa, so in the book I mentioned that Zoid gave Prairie that like musical business card from Takeshi. And PTA took this idea and put his own spin on it, because when Leo and Willa have to leave and take on new identities because Perfidia has been naming names, this guy who's part of their group gives him this scanner, and he's like, I do not hand these out willy-nilly. So if you meet someone else with these, trust them with your life. And when you come in a certain range of someone else who has one, they will play a song, and that will alert you that someone else with one is nearby. And so he gives Leo 2 of them, one for him, one for Willa. And as Willa gets older, whenever she leaves the house, he always makes sure that she takes this with her. And so she is going to a school dance when we start in the current timeline, and she hears the music go off when she is in the bathroom, and Regina Hall shows up. So she was a member of the French 75, and she is basically the DL counterpart. So her name here is Deandra. But yeah, they know that Lockjaw is coming for Willa, so Deandra has shown up to get Willa to safety, and rather than taking her to like this ninja colony like in the book, in the movie they take her to a convent in the hills run by some unconventional nuns. And her time in both is fairly different. But in both, Willa/Prairie had thought her mom was a hero, but her time with DL/Deandra, she realizes the truth, and that she ratted on her fellow revolutionaries. And in the movie, while she is in this convent, Lockjaw does find her here, and he does a DNA test on her, which confirms that she is his child. And so in the book, he tells her that he's her dad, but we don't know if that's even true. Whereas in the movie, we see for a fact that, yeah, he's her dad. And in the movie, the reason Lockjaw wants to find her and wants to confirm whether or not she is his child is because he has been offered a membership into the Christmas Adventurers Club, which is this white nationalist group who's super against immigration and against interracial relationships. And a lot of rich, powerful men are part of this group. So it's a huge honor for Lockjaw to be offered a role in this club. However, there is an interview process that is very thorough, a background check, all that stuff. And one of the questions is, have you ever had an interracial relationship? And if you have, you can't be a member. And Lockjaw tells them no, which is a lie, because he was with Perfidia. And he knows Perfidia had a child. And so he's like, I need to find her. And if she's my child, I need to kill her and get rid of the evidence. That way the Christmas Adventurers won't find out that I have a biracial child. But similar to how Brock was just a puppet in the book in many ways, we see that here too, and how Lockjaw is just a very pathetic character. And he just says all of the right stuff, but doesn't seem to believe any of it very much. Like when the Christmas guy quotes Lockjaw to Lockjaw about like, oh, if you want to save the earth, you start by stopping immigration. He says that to Lockjaw, and Lockjaw doesn't even remember that he's the one who said that. So clearly he doesn't have much passion behind what he's doing. He's just going through the motions because he's just so desperate to belong. And when he finds out Willa is his daughter, it's interesting because he wants her dead. And yet he also so quickly adopts the title of her father. And when he orders one of his soldiers to take Willa to the car, he says like, put my kid in the car. And then he has the weird daddy-daughter games line, which came across kind of creepy. But then he's talking to her so much, embracing the title of being her father. And while his attitude about this, in part, you could see this as coming from his desire for belonging or, a desire for an identity, it is also very much a power thing, and he acts like because he is her biological dad, she therefore is obligated to respect him and do as he says. And he also tells her how much he loved Perfidia and how he admired her, and she stood up for what she believed in, even though what Perfidia believed in went against everything Lockjaw is doing. So he shouldn't be admiring her because he stands for everything that's the opposite. And yet again, we see how he doesn't firmly believe these principles. He's just going through the motions, and how he admired Perfidia so much because she was so strong and confident and had true beliefs and ideas that she followed with all of her heart. And even in the movie, in the book, Frenessy and Brock have a relationship, and he is definitely using her, and throughout the relationship, she is giving him information. Whereas in the movie, when he confronts Perfidia, he tells her, blow up whatever you want, I don't care. I just want to have sex with you, essentially. And so again, he's not concerned with trying to stop her. He just is going through the motions so that he can have honor and prestige. And so he is just wanting acceptance from someone somewhere. And being a Christmas adventurer will finally make him feel like he is a superior man who has a belonging. And he doesn't have the self-confidence to think highly of himself on his own. He needs someone else to tell him this. And so yeah, he's just very pathetic. And again, he was pathetic in the book as well. And again, the reason he goes after Prairie is because when he loses Frenessy and when he loses control over her, he goes into a tailspin, right? And so all these years later, he is now returning because he can't stop living in the past. And the Christmas Adventurers Club was hilarious. And, definitely there's some dark humor in this movie, but also just some straight up humor. But yeah, the Christmas Adventurers Club was just so ridiculous. But anyway. And then also in the end, Lockjaw basically comes back from the dead in a sense, which again, the fact that he's turned into a thanatoid in the book, which is a zombie, someone who is undead, I think that's I don't know if that's where PTA was inspired for him to come back from the dead in the movie in a way. But anyway, he comes back from being shot so that he can finally become a Christmas adventurer, and he lies to them and he says that a semen demon took his semen. And so that's how he tries to explain Perfidia and Willow and everything that happened to Willa. But ultimately, the Christmas adventurers know he is lying, and so they kill him. And that is his fate. Also, by the way, I love how in PTA movies, oftentimes the characters don't change who they are. Willa experiences the most change throughout the course of this movie, but the others, specifically, Sensei, Leo, Lockjaw, by the end of the movie, they're the same people they had been earlier, right? Lockjaw hasn't changed his mind. This is still what he wants. And anyway, what a hilarious ending, that interview scene. And then to move on to Leo and Willa. So in the movie, it's interesting because when they have to take on new identities, the guy gives them the identities of a mother and son who have recently died. So Willa gets the name of the mother, Leo gets the name Bob, which is the name of the son. And so it's interesting because this is the dynamic they adopt as time goes on, right? Where Willa is more of the adult, the mother, and Leo is more immature and childish. And she thinks he is paranoid, of course, and yet when Deandra, Regina, shows up, she realizes that this is all for real, and she remembers the code words perfectly, whereas Leo's character does not. And yeah, he was just so hilarious in this and had so many fantastic scenes. And I love when Willa asks Deandra, she's like, what about my dad? And she's like, don't worry about him. He trained for this. And then we see that Leo is just a mess. And so I heard in an interview how in espionage movies where it's some guy has to be brought out of retirement and he's been training all along and is on top of it and he, is the hero. And Leo is the opposite of that, right? Because he doesn't remember any of it. He hasn't been maintaining his training, and he doesn't have any heroic moments really, you know? And so he's just a hot mess throughout this whole movie. But yeah, he was fantastic, and I loved his character so much. And while he is definitely a lot of the comedy relief, there's a lot of comedy throughout this, right? Like Sean Penn's character is also very funny, and then Benicio del Toro was fantastic. So yeah, anyway, just a lot of humor throughout this entire film. But then the ending is so good because Willa has just shot the Christmas adventurer, and she didn't want to, but he gave her no choice. And so throughout everything that has happened, you know, she's freaking out. She just committed murder. And this is when Leo comes up and he has the scanner, and she is yelling at him like, "Who are you?" Because again, she's having an identity crisis from all that has happened, and she's learned new information about her mom, and she learned that Leo isn't even her real dad, and so she just feels unsure about everything. And so she's yelling at him, "Who are you?" And he's telling her like, "Willa, it's me, like it's your dad." And he keeps trying to reassure her this, and then finally she lets her guard down and runs over to him, and they hug, and it was such a sweet, sweet moment. And the fact that she now knows that Leo is not her biological father, and yet Leo has no idea, right? But ultimately, it also doesn't matter because they have just such a bond and a closeness. And I love that PTA chose to highlight this father-daughter relationship because Zoid, he kind of bookends the story in the book Vineland. He's in the beginning, he's there in the end, but the father-daughter relationship wasn't the biggest thing going on, whereas the movie really chose to highlight that. And yeah, it was just so sweet. I mean, I will say though, there is a quote from the book that was really sweet as well, where it talks about Zoid's love for Prairie. And so I do want to share that. "And he had his belated moment of welcome to the planet Earth, in which he knew, dismayingly, that he would have to, do anything to keep this dear small life from harm, up to and including Brock Vond, is a possibility he wasn't too happy with. But as he watched her then, year by year, among these reunion faces, her own was growing more and more to look alike, continuing to feel no least premonitory sign of governmental interest from over the horizon beyond the mental disability checks that arrived faithfully as the moon, he at last began, even out scuffling every day, to relax some, to understand that this had been the place to bring her and himself after all. That for a few years anyway, he must have chosen right for a change. That time they'd come through the slides and storms to be put in here to harbor in Vineland. Vineland the good." But then I also love how Leo's character, like he's such a pothead, right? And he drinks a lot. And I love how it mentions that he was part of a band because Zoid had been part of a band too. But how he also is like a well-meaning father who is trying. And even though he's not an active revolutionary anymore, he still values those things. And I love the scene when he's when he's at the parent-teacher conference and he's like, I hope you're teaching the right kind of history, and how he still holds on to those ideas and those beliefs, right? And then also in this moment, he starts to cry because she is saying how great Prairie is doing. So the fact that she's doing well despite never having known her mom, and I'm sure he feels inadequate at times, and so he gets emotional. And in the book, we do hear that Zoid, for a time, he was constantly crying and very emotional over everything, but then eventually he learns to kind of harness his emotions because he realizes that people don't like him crying all the time. But yeah, again, I just loved his character so much. And when he is talking to her friends, when they show up to pick her up was fantastic. When he is talking on the payphone in his robe and glasses, like, wow, I feel like that is already iconic. And then when he falls off the roof while trying to get away, and then he ends up being arrested. And then I love when Sensei comes to pick him up and they take a selfie to document it. And yeah, he's just like a bumbling mess the whole time. And he's so hilarious while also being so sweet and endearing. But I also want to talk about Sensei real quick because, we have the ninjets in the book Vineland, and DL is also like a karate master in the book. And so she has a sensei who we hear about. However, he's not a prominent character. Whereas here in the movie, we have Del Toro playing Willa's sensei, who is also working with another member of the French 75 to help immigrants. And he is also in this town to help Leo should anything happen, which it does. But yeah, he just has this calm, chill vibe, and no matter what happens, he remembers to breathe and think ocean waves, and no matter what goes wrong, Del Toro is just the cool cucumber who is there to help. And again, I just loved their friendship and their dynamics so much. It was perfect. And then also again, Del Toro is always saying like ocean waves, like just accept what happens, just ride the waves. And this kind of comes into play in the end as well, because in the final car chase scene, the road is like waves. And the way Willa stops the car in order for the Christmas adventurer to then crash into her car while she is hiding off on the side, like, oh, I just love that all so much. It was so good. But then I wanted to mention the Deandra character, because we never see what happens to her. Like what I'm fine with us not seeing what happens to Sensei because he gets arrested, but like I feel confident that he's fine. Whereas Deandra, I'm like, what happened to her? I want to know. And Regina Hall was just so fantastic in this movie. She is, in many ways, is the moral center for these people. And she's also still, fighting the fight 15 years later. And she is the one who shows up to protect Willa. And we get a scene in the movie when one of the nuns, she had also been a revolutionary, and she tells Deandra that Deandra still has more fight in her than the others, because everybody, they're getting older and they're losing the energy to keep going on. But she says Deandra still has some of that fight left. And this did make me think of a quote in the book about DL, which reads, DL, the steady beating heart of the collective, who could never have made the deal with Brock that Frenessy had. And so I like that it associates her with the steady beating heart of the collective, because that is the vibe I got from her in the movie as well. And we see her being interrogated in the end, and the guy is saying that if she tells him where Leo is, she can save Willa. And she says, I would tell you if I knew, but I don't know. And we also got this moment earlier when Billy Goat was being interrogated, and at first he wasn't giving in, but then the guy uses his sister, and he's like, well, if you don't tell us, we're gonna hurt your sister. And so the guy ends up ratting on Leo and Willa. And so we see how, members of this group had judged Perfidia for ratting on them, and yet they see that when they're in that situation, how the people are able to manipulate them in a way that makes them feel like they have no choice but to name names. And so maybe they thought that since Perfidia turned them in, she must not have believed in the cause. But that's not true. They all believed in what they were doing, but that doesn't mean they're not still human. And when a life they love is threatened, it's hard not to name names and turn on these other people. And then in the very end of the movie, so now that Brock is gone, Leo and Willa have moved back into their home, and he gives Willa a letter that Perfidia had written to her a couple years prior. And in this letter, Perfidia says how she thinks about Willa every single day, and how when she thinks about the events in her life that led her to be where she is, how she's just like, wow, it's insane. And she also says how they tried to change the world and failed, and she wonders, but will you succeed where we failed? And then later we see Willa listening to something that is saying how there is going to be a protest or some sort of something going on in Oakland. And so it leaves with her driving out to go join this new rebellion. And Leo, he gives his blessing, and he also accepts that this is what Willa wants. And he tried to stop Perfidia from continuing this once they became a family. But with Willa, he accepts that, this is in her blood and this is what she wants, and he supports it. And so the movie ends on a very hopeful note, showing that no matter what past or current generations are unable to do, there will always be a new group of radicals standing up to fight who will pick up where the previous generation left off. And then to move on to Eddington. So something that initially really stuck out to me in this movie is the way almost every character exploits tragedy. But that right there is something I could go on for so long about. But for the sake of this video, I just want to focus on how they use TV and media and the internet to exploit the tragedies, because that is, it circles back to Vineland. Because in that book, we hear how TV influences everything, as I touched on earlier. And whether what they see on the TV is true or false or imaginary or real, it doesn't matter, because in the 1980s timeline, they're just taking it all in. In the 60s timeline, they were trying to use film as a way to change the world for the better, but then it also becomes their downfall, and it turns into a tool that is used to control and confuse and stupefy the people. And this is a huge theme in Eddington. So we see here how the teens will post on social media constantly, right? And whether their intentions are good or not, what they are trying to achieve loses its value because they're going about it in such an exploitative way, trying to gain something out of it, trying to prove something to those around them about themselves. Rather than simply believing in a cause and fighting for it, they are focused on making a show of it and documenting it. Again, it doesn't mean they all don't believe it, and obviously Eric and Brian certainly don't believe it, and they're just going about it for different reasons. But yeah, even those who do have good intentions, again, the fact that they're selling it in a sense and commodifying it lessens the value. And Sarah's an example of someone who seems to have good intentions, and yet, she's also very cringy with her online presence. And then also a lot of what she does, she seems to be doing it as a way to try to get the attention of Michael, try to get him to her, and yet it never really works. So she herself too has ulterior motives. Also with Sarah, I wanted to point out the fact that she tells her friend that they had something going on, but she broke up with him because he's a cop. When in reality, we know that Michael was never particularly interested, in part because of her age, because he felt like she was too young for him. And so she lies, making it seem like, oh, I did it because he's a cop, when really that wasn't the truth. But again, both things can be true. You can truly believe in something while also going about it in all the wrong ways. And yeah, we have Brian, who is 100% pretending in order to get with Sarah. But once Eric dies, he then exploits Eric's death for his own gain to get attention. And then when he shoots the Antifa person, he exploits that too, and he makes it all about himself. And he literally is holding his phone in one hand and the gun in the other so that he can film the guy as he shoots him, because just everything has to be documented and he has to make a show of everything. And seeing the phone side by side with the gun made me think of this line from Vineland. One always includes a camera somewhere and the other always includes a gun. One is make-believe, one is real. What if this is some branch point in your life where you'll have to choose between worlds? But 35 years after that book was published, we put more value than ever on the quote-unquote make-believe world of the internet and the TV, to the point that it isn't even make-believe anymore for so many. And so many of us, as we see in Eddington, it's so common to express yourself online, and this intangible online world, we let that determine who we are as people in the real world. And also how the people of Eddington kind of took something that wasn't even about them, that was on the internet, and they brought it to their neighborhoods when it didn't even exist there to begin with. And I get there's pros and cons, because it's just because something doesn't happen in your town doesn't mean you shouldn't care. And obviously it was symbolic of the systematic racism and everything. But yeah, it is kind of interesting to think how nothing was happening in their town. It was peaceful there, peaceful. I'm not saying it didn't need to change, but how the internet infiltrated their own local streets, even though nothing specific even happened in those streets. Again, it's a complicated area, right? And that's what makes this movie so uncomfortable to watch at times, because Ari Aster is willing to get into the discomfort of these conversations. But in Vineland, they, meaning Brock and those in control, they feel that the youth are passionate and they can use that. They just need to lead them in the right direction, aka manipulate them. And Brian, he's desperate to feel important, right? So that's where his quote unquote passion comes from, is he just wants to be important to Sarah specifically at the start. But he has no morals behind his actions. So of course he ends up becoming a grifter who goes from posing as a leftist to someone who is now on the right. And again, he never had any sincerity behind his actions to begin with. And so in the end, he really has just sold his soul in favor of commodifying his politics and going along with whatever will get him money and attention. And the way Vineland incorporates TV so much throughout that book, and the way TV is used, we see that in Eddington as well. Again, the TV as well as the internet, social media, YouTube, all of that. And I initially was trying to keep track of how many times we see people looking at a screen and using the screen for information or connection. But I stopped keeping track because it literally is constant. And it's funny because I noticed this the first and second time I watched Eddington, but it wasn't until I was reading Vineland I kept thinking of Eddington and how it uses the internet and TV and screens so much. And that's when it kind of clicked for me, and I was like, wow, I kind of saw what Ari Aster was going for in a sense, thanks to reading Vineland. which kind of also is scary because it's like in my life, I'm looking at screens so much that initially in Eddington, like I realized they were incorporating social media and the news and everything, and yet it also felt so normal because that's my daily life too, is spending so much time online and, you know, one site or another. And yeah, definitely made me want to step away, which is funny because here, you know, one of the reasons I'm online so much is because I have a YouTube channel, you know, and so I'm one of the people contributing to people being online more to some extent. But yeah, basically Eddington is showing how online life invades our real world, so much so if we allow it. You have his wife, Louise, watching online content from Vernon and she gets sucked into that world. His mother-in-law is obsessed with online conspiracy theories, and in the end, she has her own online following, sharing her crazy ideas to a large audience now. Because of course, this whack job is the one who has benefited from all of this. And then you have the younger people who are into TikTok and Instagram, and Ted using TV commercials. And also we see him staging a moment to be filmed where he's like reading or signing a document. And then the news is a manipulation and a farce. We have Joe reporting on the murder of Ted and his son and talking about how like, oh, we're going to catch the killers. And it very clearly was Antifa when really he is the one who did it. And so it's all just a lie and it's all just manipulation. By the way, I'll be using the word manipulation a lot. I already have been, but obviously that's a big theme of Eddington. And yeah, I just love how Ari Aster uses the internet to, not only is that how so many of the characters communicate and how they get information, but the audience, the movie audience, gets so much information about the characters through social media as well. You know, we see Louise's Facebook video she posts to combat the Facebook video Joe had posted that was a lie about her and Ted. And later we see what has happened with her when the mother-in-law shows him and the viewer a YouTube video from one of Vernon's events. And then the stuff with Brian we learned about through an Instagram video montage. And then in the very end, they are making the announcement about the data center and they are presenting that, you know, that's being filmed. And we see Michael holding a phone recording it and he zooms in on Joe. And I feel like the zoom in kind of seems to signify how insignificant Joe has become because he can no longer move or speak. He has become a representation of the puppet leadership that is controlled by money. And in the very end, he is even suspended by straps when they're putting him into the bed, which kind of reminded me how Brock was suspended by the helicopter straps, signifying how they are both puppets and not in control of anything. They just have the illusion of control. And I also love the detail of how Warren was the advisor for Ted. The data center is using Warren to get what they want. And it shows how they don't care about party affiliation because Ted was on the left and they were going to use him to get their data center. And once that didn't work out, they were like, fine, whatever, we don't care. We don't care if this other lady is far right. We're still going to get what we want. And so Warren is the advisor regardless of what side they're on. And ultimately, the data center gets what they want. And then I love how on Joe's truck, when he has all of his propaganda stuff, there is a very prominent sign that reads, "You're being manipulated," and "your" is spelled wrong. Again, like that's what this shirt is from. And initially I thought it was just to be funny, the fact that it's misspelled, but we see this sign so much. And so just right there, it gets our attention. But the fact that it's misspelled draws your attention to it all the more. And that's very intentional, right? Because that is Aster's way of telling the audience that anytime they are watching anything, including this movie right here, they are being manipulated. And the themes in Vineland about how higher ups will use TV to confuse and distort reality and cause contention and how it manipulates, that's a hard thing to translate into a movie, right? And yet I think Aster does it he executes it so well in this film. And again, this isn't even an adaptation of Vineland, and yet he took that theme within that book. I mean, I shouldn't say that because I don't know if he's ever read Vineland. So I'm just saying it's a coincidence that Eddington brings to life this theme in such a perfect way. And also Eddington and Vineland, they're both named after towns, which is another coincidence. But the fact that the commentary within Vineland still applies today, it just shows how timeless that book is, right? And then I want to talk about Michael because he seemed to be the most grounded character in the movie. What he sees online doesn't make him act erratically, even though people are literally yelling at him that he should be acting out. And when Brian tries to upset him with a photo on Instagram, Michael doesn't care. He says the only reason it bothers me is because I know they're trying to bother me. So he is the only one who sees through the manipulation and doesn't fall for it. And we also learned that his dad was captain on the police force when Joe was only a deputy. And yet he makes a point to say like, yeah, but that's as far as my dad ever got. And so Joe started out as a deputy when Michael's dad was a captain. And yet Joe is the one who ended up becoming sheriff. And Lou's dad had been the previous sheriff. And so the fact that Michael points out that his dad never made it any further, despite clearly he should have, given how much longer he had been on the force and how much longer he was captain, like why didn't he make it to sheriff? Why didn't he make it higher? It's pretty clear, partly due to racism, right? And Michael makes this point to Joe in a way, and yet it totally goes over Joe's head and he's just like, oh, we all got to start somewhere. And Michael tells Joe that he has high aspirations, right? Like he wants to make it to the top. But then later he is used by the Antifa posers. So they're not real Antifa people. They're just like these terrorists who were hired by some rich higher up, probably affiliated with Solidgoldmagikarp. And Michael, is harmed in the explosion, but lives. And he hadn't cared about what was online. And yet in the end, he is the one filming Joe. And we then see him target shooting in the end, and he has gotten considerably better in the last year. So obviously he's been practicing. And I would love to hear what people think about the ending as far as Michael goes in particular, because I feel like there's a lot of different ways you could see this, and you could definitely see this in a negative way. Again, by the end of the movie, everything is off kilter, right? And so you could see that with Michael. And yet part of me, maybe I'm just grasping, wanting something positive within this movie. So part of me is like, maybe it's a positive ending for him. He has become aware of the corruption and he still does see the truth, and he sees what a joke Joe has become and how, I mean, he was kind of pathetic earlier too, let's be honest, and very pitiable. But by the end, like, he did not want the data center, and now he's a representation of the data center being there. But anyway, seeing Michael then in the end target shooting, he must still have those same goals and aspirations, and maybe he wants to fight the system in a sense. But seeing him out in the dark and then seeing the light coming from the data center, it definitely seems like a negative ending all the way around. But part of me wants to believe that showing Michael is supposed to be a sign of hope and that there's people who still see the truth and are still wanting to fight the system. But yeah, I would love to know what you think of the ending with Michael. And yeah, the bitterness in Eddington does reflect Vineland, right? Because like I said, that has a lot of bitterness as well. And it's, pretty jaded while also being satirical. And that's also what we get here in Eddington. But Vineland did have a bit of hope in the end. And so yeah, I kind of want to think that there's some hope in the end of Eddington as well. But ultimately, it kind of has the message that if we keep falling for the manipulation tactics of the government, the rich, the powerful, then we're all screwed. And only the con artists with no real morals will succeed. And then also, all three of these, Eddington, Vineland, One Battle, they show how people in power, again, the government, the military, the rich, they also cause drama and violence and death in cities for their own gain while pinning it on whoever is convenient. And then we also see how those in power are also like sick and twisted in their own ways, because in One Battle we have the Christmas Adventurers Club, which is pretty sick and twisted. And then in Eddington, we hear how Lou's dad molested her, and he was a leadership government person because he was a sheriff. And then you also have Vernon, whose father worked in government along with his colleagues, who were also pedophiles. That's if we're to assume Vernon's story is true. I have such conflicted feelings about Vernon, which, to go on a little side tangent here, part of me, I just felt so bad for Lou, right? And I wanted her to be happy. And so in the end, we see that she seems happy, and she's also now pregnant, something she did not want to happen when she was with Joe. And she has opened up about her dad abusing her, and Vernon has helped her get rid of the shame and the guilt, and she has been freed in many ways. And he is also using her artwork as a set piece, which on one hand, it's like, oh wow, he actually appreciates her art and he's highlighting it and using it for this whole thing. And yet the other part is like, is he just taking advantage of her because she was vulnerable and in need? And so is he just using her like the way he uses other people who truly were molested, and he exploits them, acting like he's doing it for a good cause and wanting to help? And so in some ways, there were certain things about him where it's like, oh, it's a good message he's sending. And yet at the same time, he came across as a total fraud. So this guy seems like he's full of crap in many ways. Yeah, it definitely feels like a negative ending for her too, as much as I wish it were a positive one. And by the way, I recently watched Midsummer for the first time, and I talk about it in my Wicker Man video, so check that out if you haven't. But I'm realizing what Vernon, which, by the way, spoilers for Midsummer and how it connects to Eddington. So what Vernon is doing with the Louise is similar to what the cult in Midsummer did with Danny. Because in both cases, they are providing something positive, right? Again, he's making Louise feel heard and feel seen, and she's able to be open about this experience she has kept to herself for so long. And in Midsummer, they make Danny realize, like, you are in a horrible relationship with this guy and he does not appreciate you. And so they are using someone who is vulnerable and in need, and they manipulate that and they twist that in order to take advantage. So I definitely think that is what Vernon is doing here with the Louise. So even though she looks happy in the end, unfortunately, I definitely think it is a negative end for her, just like it was for Danny. And also another correlation is in both of those movies, Joe and Christian, their final state, we see them unable to move or speak, right? And so that's very interesting as well, that they're both paralyzed physically and verbally in the end, and all they can do is see what is happening, but do nothing about it. So yeah, definitely some interesting correlations. But this movie also feels very Pynchon-esque because with Eddington, the fact that Aster is giving a more even approach by taking aim at both sides of the drama amongst the everyday people going on in 2020, like, again, that's why this movie can be uncomfortable to watch, is because he's showcasing the reality of both extremes, but that's also why I love it. And granted, the character of Cross, he and his deputy, like, they're two of the worst, right? And I also love how his deputy's name is Guy Tooley, because he's a guy and he's a tool. But the way he so quickly is willing to turn on Michael, and then Joe knows Michael is innocent, but he quickly takes advantage, being like, ooh, if I pin it on him, then I'm in the clear. So the way they both turn on Michael for their different reasons is just so infuriating. And that honestly is like one of the most difficult scenes in some ways, because it's just so horrible what both of them are doing. And Brian too, right? Because Brian is the one who was like, oh, I thought you guys should see this. And so they're all just so pathetic and horrible. But on the opposite side, we also see how all for show many of the protesters were. Again, like they care, but they're also filming everything and being so aggressive and feeding into the divisiveness. They are bringing that online animosity into the streets of their own town. And I also love the scene when Joe tells Ted, I am a better person than you. And that also, just that right there, sums up so much of the online animosity we see. It's just one person trying to prove to themselves and the online world that they are a better person than this other person. And so that's what so much of it comes down to. Of course, not all of it. There's people who are actually trying to do good and not just trying to make themselves look good. Like they're actually trying to enact a positive change, and they're not doing it for their own benefit. But I would say a lot of people, they just have that attitude of like, I am a better person than you, and I am here to try to prove it in the online world. And then something Vernon says in the audio that Lou is listening to at the start is the end goal of media the end of mediation, which seems kind of spot on. Which again, this guy seems like a total con artist, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have some good stuff mixed in. Which, he says, like love and evil can both coexist. Like an evil person can be it's sentimental. An evil person can still be sentimental, and love can exist within evil. And so I think that's also one of the themes going on here, is that we want to see things in such black and white when really things can get complicated, right? And sometimes two things that don't seem like they both can be true are both true, right? Like someone can be making a show of how they want to make a difference in the world and make the world a better place. And it's like, wow, like they're just posting this online a ton, just trying to get attention. And it's like, yeah, sure, maybe they are trying to get attention, but maybe they are also trying to make the world a better place in their very flawed way. So anyway, just seeing that stuff is more complicated and opposing things can coexist. But also a huge Pynchon theme that the movie shows is how the higher ups, those with the money and power, they want the people to be in contention amongst ourselves, and they want confusion and chaos. And so when we step into those stereotypes and give in to the divisiveness, the only ones who win are those at the top. And this theme from Vineland is so fitting today in 2025, right? Like our current leader is encouraging those on his side to hate the opposing side. So he's encouraging hate, and he's encouraging building up these barriers between people. And I get also with those who are against him, you know, I have struggled with so much fear and despair and anger and resentment towards those who voted for him. So I've struggled with those negative feelings, and, you know, seeing people on his side is very one-dimensional, like everyday people. I'm not talking about government, but everyday people who voted for him. Sometimes I struggle to see that they are fellow humans who we could find common ground, right? Like there is a middle ground here that we could agree on. And sometimes I have a hard time remembering that because I'm so filled with anger. And so this is something I'm struggling with too. But honestly, like reading Vineland and doing this whole video, it's made me want to be better at letting go of those negative feelings, because when we are in contention with ourselves, the only people who benefit are those at the top with the power. And they do that so that they can get even more power and more control, and how they are just manipulating us and pitting us against each other. And so we need to instead focus on compassion and kindness and having an open dialogue and getting rid of those barriers that people in power are trying to build between us. And also, speaking of barriers, Joe Cross doesn't want the Pueblo to be involved in the investigation. He wants to rely on that border to keep the truth hidden. Just like people at the top rely on these fictional borders between people, these fictional barriers between people and countries, they want those maintained so that they can keep their control and keep the manipulation going on and encourage the contention. And also lack of communication brings me to the data center. So it's called Solidgoldmagikarp, and this name is very significant. So what I'm about to share, I learned from a blog called Film Colossus, and I will link their page down below. But what they shared in this blog post kind of blew my mind, and so I want to share it with you. Also, this gets into like AI and kind of, it's stuff that goes over my head, to be honest. And so I'm going to explain a very dumbed down version. But again, if you want to learn the nitty gritty details, you can click that website link. But Solidgoldmagikarp, that is a real term. In the early days of like ChatGPT and stuff, when people input that word, which has to do with Pokemon, the AI did not know what that meant, and it made it like freak out, and it had different associations for the words, and it couldn't make sense of it. And so it made AI act in erratic ways because it didn't know what was going on. And so the presence of this company with this name, and also the presence of COVID, which is embodied in the homeless man, who the movie ties, I'm just going to call it Magikarp, the full name is too much, but the movie ties the homeless man and COVID to Magikarp because we see both him and the sign for the center at the beginning. And so like this word did for AI, COVID also caused a glitch in our real world system that made people behave erratically, and everyone is interpreting everything differently. In that blog, it talks about the first disagreement between Ted and Joe, which is about the homeless man, and how they perceive what is happening differently, representing how people interpreted the events of 2020 differently. And people, it's like they're on different planes of reality, and we're seeing a different version of reality than the other person next to us. And this homeless man, he is who literally brings COVID to Eddington, and he spreads it to Joe. And if this guy is also connected symbolically to Magikarp, then when Joe gets infected with COVID, it also represents the issues and glitches that arise when this word was given to AI. So Joe Cross has something inside himself, literally and figuratively, that he can't compute, and it makes him act crazy. And after the incredible Katy Perry slap scene, he is driving down the road and someone yells, "You're going the wrong way." And at this point, again, he already has COVID growing in his system, which represents the glitch. And so he's going the wrong way, literally and figuratively, due to the glitch within himself and the glitch within society. And so he is doing what we know to be wrong by driving on the wrong side of the road. And then he continues to do what we know to be wrong by killing 3 innocent people and blaming it on this anti-terrorist group. And the final shootout is just so incredible. Certain things about this movie, it's almost like people bring their worst fears to Eddington, say the name 3 times and it's going to show up or something. And this final shootout almost seems to be Joe's worst fears coming to life, because he was seeing the Antifa stuff going on in the news and just he was feeling that in his head, and he's blaming these deaths on Antifa, and then he almost summons them to Eddington. But again, keep in mind, this is not Antifa. This is clearly a group that was hired by Solidgoldmagikarp in order to ensure that they could get their data center. So that's who I assume hired them. But yeah, this whole ending just feels so bizarre and nightmarish in many ways, and it doesn't feel like it's actual reality. As this movie progresses, like by the end, everything feels so off and feels so wrong. And even though like within the world of this movie, this shootout really does happen, and yet it feels so, again, it doesn't feel real. But that's the point, is because the glitch in the system has caused reality to feel weird and wrong, and clearly something is off. And then I love the scene when he is standing in the middle of the road and the camera pans and he is alone, right? He is alone, literally and figuratively, but he also walks the same path down into town that the homeless man did at the start, and he crashes into a Native American museum and he ruins it. And then Butterfly, who had been doing his job and found Cross out, is an innocent bystander who is killed in the crossfire. But a year later, he is also propped up as a symbol that is used by the AI company. So they are just profiting off the deaths of so many innocent people and profiting off of Joe's near death. And the way Butterfly is treated throughout this movie, as well as just the Pueblo, how it's talked about, that's a representation of kind of how white people throughout history have treated Native Americans and been so disrespectful. And the fact that he crashes through this Native American museum and ruins it, right? Like, it's so symbolic. But then also the shootout reminded me of a lot of Westerns, High Noon, for example, right? Where the townspeople aren't around and he is left to face the bad guy alone in the streets of the town where he's the sheriff. And just how Eddington takes so many of these familiar Western plot beats and he twists it and modernizes it. And I just love what he's doing. And again, that could be a whole other video, is comparing Eddington, this new modern Western, with Westerns from the past. And you also have No Country, right? Which is another modern Western. So that was 2008. And so now Eddington is an example of an even more modern Western. And yeah, I could go on about Eddington for so long. It's just such a fantastic movie. I'm so sad it did not do well in the box office. But again, this is a movie that I think will just age so well. And my hope is that years down the road, people will look back on this movie as a masterpiece. And it's going to be one of those that has like, oh, fun trivia. Eddington, despite its fame now, actually flopped at the box office. You hear that about so many movies we love today. So yeah, maybe that'll be the case with Eddington as well. And now to just wrap up the video, my final thoughts. Both of these movies are incredible and very different while also having some similarities. And also because Vineland is kind of a bittersweet story, both of these movies are a great combination because while Eddington is more bitter, one battle is more sweet. And so together they are the bittersweet that was Vineland. And so yeah, I guess that wraps it up for all 3 of these. I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure and comment your thoughts down below. Also, I would love to cover Inherent Vice, which is another Thomas Pynchon book that PTA adapted. I have seen the movie, actually. I saw it when it came out, so it's been a long time now. But yeah, so I would love to cover that, which also has Joaquin Phoenix, who was in Eddington, so he's fantastic. But yeah, comment if you would like me to cover Inherent Vice, and if it gets a lot of attention, I will do it sooner rather than later. And as always, to those who watched this video all the way through, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And also just a reminder, I mentioned Patreon earlier with the Vertigo, but if you want an exclusive book versus movie video every month for $2 on Patreon. You can get that for October. I will actually have 2 bonus Patreon videos, one for 1922 by Stephen King, and I will also be covering Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, which is based on a book. So you're getting 2 for the price of 1 in October if you sign up. And yeah, thank you all so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe and comment your thoughts down below. And I just want to thank you super duper very much.